Good. We went over to the cul-de-sacs today. Check out the scene there, kind of the drainage types in.
Progress on that storm drain and helpful. Your action to get that outfall on the side.
Soil underneath it.
Yeah, so with the
collapsing
we
it.
need to get it, dig it, it drains with that. It's a little bit more, more fill, and make it very soft, so it's not gonna be.
We had to serve it like protected with like all tapes and then one tree, like one little tree. It's like, what's with the tree?
The lucky one.
The one tree, yeah.
How's it looking over there?
It's like almost all demoed out. I mean, they're just taking out asphalt. I was just saying they're like putting in storm drains, those outfalls that were collapsed. And then everything's just like turned up and they're just clawing away the last pass.
Do they see it on the side?
I don't know. They're just like talking about it.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you were more than welcome. More than married. Marcus coming in, so I think we're ready. Guys ready? Okay. Good evening. I am calling to order the Governing Board of Trustees special meeting, governance workshop, budget and visioning at 5:05 p.m. Well, let's approve of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Is there a second? Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The agenda is approved. 3.1 public regarding items on the agenda. Are there any speakers left that bring them up to Megan? Megan, pass my slip. Okay. Danielle Abreu. Microphone. I guess I'll just try to forget. Here, we'll give you, yeah, we'll give you our microphone. Okay, what do I do first? Is that better? Okay.
Thank you for giving me the time to speak. My name is Danielle Abreu. I'm a parent and a child in the Belmar Union School District. I want to bring up some concerns tied to the budget. At the February board meeting this year, it was brought up that 7 positions within the district might be eliminated or modified. The community spoke and were then told that the data would be presented before the decision is final. I'm here representing the community and teachers whom are afraid to speak due to fear of retaliation. We would like to know what the plan is to still meet the needs of the students. Also, some of these positions have already been modified and/or their pay has been reduced without the data being presented. Does this indicate that the decisions have already been finalized? The community, both parents and teachers alike, would like answers to these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we are at 4.1 governance workshop.
What we're going to do is start with, we have a presentation put together, but as being a board workshop, we also invite the opportunity for the board to ask some questions, go through, and we will be able to answer and engage in sort of discussion around our budget envisioning workshop. So as a review, we did have our last budgeting vision workshop on November 9th, 2021. And at that meeting, we had a number of objectives. The main objectives were to provide an overview of our historical finances, funding sources, reserves, and budget development, and then provide information about our strategic planning and budget priorities. And so those were objectives that I think were addressed. And then discussing next steps in strategic planning and budget development and district priorities. So we carried that last one over. And in addition, we are going to bring forward fiscally responsible long-range planning and looking at programs and staffing, then facilities, and then proactive steps for fiscal stability. So more specifically, we do have an agenda on the fourth slide in front of you, just to kind of lay out what we're looking at today. So in our programs and staffing, we're looking at our educational priorities. And with those educational priorities in our district, we've long prioritized STEAM Plus. Classroom staffing and class size has been a priority in our district for many years. Sixth grade Spanish is a priority. And then the intervention and supports we provide to our students throughout the school year. We also will be looking at special education and then new legislation that we've talked about before, but we can go into a little bit more depth in the area of universal transitional kindergarten and universal meals. Then we'll move into facilities. We have some information about our measuring and implementation, and then looking at deferred maintenance and questions that come up about deferred maintenance and long-term planning with that. Facilities capacity is something that's come up in the past, so we have some information we'll share more about capacity across the district, and then looking at professional learning and the needs we have there. And then finally, the proactive steps for fiscal stability. We're going to look at projected pension rates, and so we have talked about pension rates for years, and there's a little bit of changes. We're getting towards the end of some of those hikes, and we can look at what that looks like going forward. And then that'll lead to some multi-year projections. We look at how our taxes are coming in. And then our OPEB trust fund, give an update there, and then we talk about the reserves. So as we move into the program and staffing, I'm going to ask Mark to talk about a couple of items, and then move on to
So when we look at our educational priorities, we have our STEAM Plus program, which is partially funded by the foundation. So when we look at our expenditures throughout the years, we have a 5-year history here. This was presented at our last meeting, but it was requested that we add the FTE to it, so we can see that we have moved from 34.6 FTE, and now we are currently at 29.6.
And has that lost some enrollment along the way too?
Correct.
Probably FTE for how many kids per FTE, I guess. Yeah, I assume it's gone down still.
It has. We were at about, I think, 4,400 back in 17, but that went up to
So approximately 500 students has got over that 5-year span, and we've got about 5 reduction at the across the district.
Sorry, so I missed that. What's the kind of reduction?
And I wouldn't say that this necessarily carries out district-wide, but if you were looking at it over this 5-year span, we've had a reduction in our overall student capacity
our student count of about 500, and we lost, we are down, we have lost, we've gone down by 5 in FTE for our student plus program.
And we're currently at a 30-70 split. Next, when we look at our classroom staffing, the district really values small class size. And when we look at our upper grades, which are at the higher ratios, at 27:1, which is our current staffing ratio, we have a total of 69 FTEs, full-time equivalents, that we would staff at. But if we were to reduce that ratio to 25, like we have over these past couple of years, these past 2 years due to COVID, we would have an increase of 9 teachers up to 78. So an increase of 9 teachers, the budget impact is just under $2 million. And that doesn't include the staff planning, the STEAM Plus planning allocations, sub-costs, professional learning, 6th grade Spanish. These are all additional staffing costs that we have.
So that's 2 million, so it's like 1.2.
Oh, sorry, 1.2 million.
Okay.
Sorry, Mark, I just said, so the top number is currently what it is right now, and,
No, that's if we would staff it at 27:1.
oh, yes.
And currently, for this year and last year, we were at 25:1 to lower the class size for COVID. And so if we were to continue that, it is an increase of 9.
27 is kind of what we historically run at.
Okay, so historically it's 27, and then if we were to lower it down to like 25.
This is what we're doing right now.
Got it, and that would cost us about, to maintain that, be about 1.2. Okay, got it.
Sorry, the back page, sorry, trustee, I'm just looking at the numbers more closely, and if we're looking at this, the numbers are kind of, the total cost, flat to a little bit down, but the number that's not on the page is the cost per teacher, so that is the number that's moving, that's causing the overall numbers to go down, right?
That's also correct. The cost per teacher is increasing, and so that's kind of why the total expenditure is the same, whereas the teacher count is decreasing. So there's an increase in cost per teacher.
Yeah.
And the foundation contribution has kind of been flat.
Yeah,
Almost
well, it
flat
dipped in
funded.
the last 2 years, the foundation contribution dipped by, a couple $100,000. And, district was like made up the difference there. But I think it's totally back up this year.
Yes,
Yeah.
from the updates that they provide.
Yeah.
Secondary cost.
Thank you for letting me do that.
And then another one of our priorities is our 6th grade Spanish. And that was implemented in the 1920 school year. And we have 3 Spanish teachers, so the cost is about $306,000. In the Immersion program, which started last year, we have now have 4 classrooms. And those are at no additional cost because through attrition, we substitute 1 full English class for an immersion class. And then we also value intervention and supports for our students. And so some of the intervention and supports that we provide are our school counselors. We have intervention specialists, both in math and English. And then we also have teachers on special assignment who help to guide the work that we're doing. The total cost of all the intervention and additional supports is about $1.4 million. In the current year, we are using some of our restricted funds that we've received through the federal and state programs, about $1.2 million. And then moving forward, we have a reduction in our restricted funds. Next year, about $828,000, and then in 23-24, we'll only be using $620,000 of restricted funds towards these programs.
explain, are these specialists, are they for like, is it for like mental health or is it for like more academic purposes? Because are they the counselors and things, or do they work on the same things or different stuff? Just kind of curious what it is.
It's different, the intervention specialists are focused on academics.
Okay. And then counselors would be more.
The social emotional.
Okay.
Okay, but so the available restricted funds is decreasing in coming years. Can you explain what that is?
So, part of it is COVID funds that we received for learning loss mitigation. And so, some of the intervention specialists have been funded out of there for one time. And then, we're using some of our professional development money, to continue some of that work, to guide some of that work for our teachers. And the other money that we also receive that's ongoing is mental health money. So our mental health money wants to pay for a mental health therapist and their counselors. So that's part of the one-time money that's ongoing.
So the goal is to spend 1.4 million and make up the shortfalls and restricted funds with general fund dollars.
Well, currently, some of those positions are expiring with some of the restricted funds. And so, as they expire, we are continuing with the counselors.
Positions are expiring, we're keeping those.
Yes, we're keeping some of the counselors and intervention
So
specialists.
what are we not keeping then?
We had some reading interventions. We had more of our intervention supports that we used as part of the expanded learning opportunity grant. And then we have kept, though, some of the intervention specialists to roll into next year that will still be funded with another fund source, but we don't have enough to fund it at the same level. So there are some of those that will be a little bit less as you go forward. And
So after 23, 24, what are we spending for intervention support then? You know, it's based on, I guess. I mean, we're dropping FTE, how many FTE are we dropping?
so we have only scheduled out for the intervention specialists to have them as part of the funding sources that were restricted.
For one-time money, we can't, so they're temporary employees, they're getting on out.
If we were to look at keeping any of those, then we'd have to look at, in a longer term capacity, we'd have to look at that as that expense that we have to general fund or the funding source.
I guess I'm asking is what is our commitment, what are we, ongoing outside of one-time money for interventions, or how much are we looking at, or is it priority for us to do something like this?
I would say closer to around $1 million.
Okay.
So in 23, 24, after that, we would be contributing about $400,000 to continue with.
Well, we can have 24, 25 would be a full million.
Right.
Yeah, so to run that, okay.
Well, not a full million. I'd have to check, but some of the money is ongoing for mental health funds.
Okay.
Are we basing the need on funds, or are we basing it on the kids? I mean, where there's a need, we should have these.
Right.
I mean, if the funds are expired, we don't want to say, oh, well, the funds are done, so we're not gonna have these intervention specialists and counselors. Absolutely.
So one example of that would be, as an intervention specialist, we looked at what we were going to have. Shelley came and talked about a need for another in reading, so we're looking at how that fits in and we'll be adding that into next year. So we are looking at the needs of kids and working with with the team as a whole to see what gets carried forward.
Okay, I just want the perspective to be, and I know what all this is, kids first, funds second. And the fact that we've gotten restricted funds, one-time funds, things of that nature, that's just a nice curve that we're able to apply to the need, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just trying to find out how much we, our commitments are ongoing.
The difference.
Yeah, we're working on ongoing
Yes. Currently, we have four counselors and one mental health therapist. And we have 4 intervention specialists, 4 reading, and 1 math.
You know, we actually, well, that's what we budgeted for, but one of our intervention specialists has since left, so we have 3 intervention specialists.
3 reading and 1 math.
2 reading and 1 math.
2 reading, 3 total, 1 math. And then how many teachers on special assignment do we have?
And then we have 2 teachers on special assignment, 2 FTE. There's 3 staff, but they equate to 2 FTE. There's a share.
Are they being used throughout the district, throughout the schools?
For the teachers on special assignment, yes, they are mathematics, and we provide all of our professional learning within mathematics. And there's one that does co-teaching at all of our schools. With our intervention specialists, we are using student data to target where the greatest need is and providing coaching and in-classroom support for those students.
Okay, so one is providing professional learning for math.
Yeah, the one FTE, so we have one that's 75%, one that's 25%, and they divide their professional learning based on their level spans.
And then the other one is working on teaching, the co-teaching model?
Correct, so facilitating that co-teaching observation cycle within the classrooms and those co-teaching partnerships, and providing the professional learning.
And we are implementing co-teachers.
We are, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the next slide. So when we look at our special education program, we have 3 years of expenditures here. We can see that our student count has decreased from 587 students down to 488 students. And our expenditures per pupil have grown from 20,400 up to 22,000. And in the current year, we have a general fund contribution of $6.3 million. And that contribution represents the funds that we contribute to the special ed program above what the federal and state governments provide to us. They sometimes refer to it as encroachment, but it's the contribution that we provide to the program.
Now we're going to transition to Ginny and Ryan. We'll talk a little bit about some of our special education programs.
Okay, thank you. So, just to touch a little bit on something that Doug brought up, we're always looking at our staffing and our programming based on student needs. And so when we're looking at staffing for special education on an annual basis, we start with student needs and programs and make sure that we're being very efficient and intentional with our staffing. So we are bringing forward a reduction in the BSI position. And so some of the questions that we had at the February board meeting was about the responsibilities of our instructional aides and clarifying the responsibilities of BSIs and looking at what that means for our BSIs to be stepped into Aide II positions. So looking at the responsibilities, starting out, our A1s and A2s are 30-hour-a-week employees, and our BSIs are 40 hours per week. So looking at that need, we're really determining that the work really requires 30 hours per week. We don't have the work for 40-hour-a-week employees working with our students, supporting the students.
Is this now or projected?
No, this is now. So, as we go through the responsibilities,
And this, 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week, really those 10 extra hours are, because the students aren't around.
right,
That was my
Right.
understanding, that we only need we don't need them to work outside of student hours.
Absolutely. So some of what we've heard as concerns are aides that work directly with students as one-to-one aides. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about those hours where we don't have students, we don't need staff.
What are the BSIs doing now then in those 10 extra hours?
That's what we want to talk about today. So really looking at the difference here between the positions of our instructional aides and our BSIs. And as a reminder, all of our BSIs were instructional aides who became BSIs. So we are offering them to return back to the BSI positions. They will be staying with the district. We're not getting rid of any of the people, just the positions based on this number of hours per week and the workload. So our A1s and B2s are assigned to work directly with individual students in small groups. So they are assigned to students or programs every day. Our BSIs are not. They serve as one-to-one support personnel for students with identified needs. That's our A1s and A2s. So we're not suggesting cutting any staff who supports students one-to-one. We're not suggesting that. What we're finding is when our BSIs are absent, we do not need substitutes for them. So a substitute is required for an absence for an A1 or an A2. So that is something that we've looked at. If we don't need a substitute for this position for the day, what is that work, that necessity for that work then? Looking at, and in fact, one thing that we did consider as we're looking at our staffing is we do have a BSI who is out on long-term leave right now, and we've been able to fill that position with a 30-hour-a-week aide. So again, really being able to show that we're able to meet the needs of the students with a 30-hour-a-week position. We don't require a 40-hour-a-week position for that. Yes?
You might cover this, but can you just remind us again how long we've had BSIs and how the position was implemented and created?
Yes, the BSIs, the position started, I believe, 2016 was the year. Prior to that, we did not have BCBAs. My understanding is the district had one BCBA at that time, which is a board certified behavior analyst. That BCBA trained the BSIs to help support training for the other aides at the time. During that 6-year period from then to now, our staff has been adequately trained, and we have trainers on staff. We have Nadine Schick, our director, is actually a trainer of trainers for CPI, for crisis prevention intervention. So she's able to conduct some of that training herself. And we have 2 BCBAs now who are also able to support some of the training of staff. And we conduct ongoing training with our staff throughout the course. So going back to sure.
Another question. Some of the correspondence that we've gotten, I think maybe you're addressing this under behavioral supports, it has talked about kids that are maybe are not on an ISP or 504. You tell my kids are going to high school.
Course selection form.
Yes, course selection form in 2 high schools right now. I'm playing top of mind. Sorry. Anyway, so it sounds like they're maybe addressing general classroom behavioral issues, and is that the case generally? And if so, it seems like that's the kind of support. So it's more like general behavioral support that the class teachers are emailing about. So would you just address?
Yes, and so I think that there are 2 things that we want to think about when we're talking about students who might need support in general ed. There is a question of a crisis intervention. If there is a crisis situation, what will we do and how will we support that? Each of our school sites has a designated team of individuals who are designated to address crisis situations, and that is our A1s, we have A2s, we have psychologists who can address that. But we also, and principals, And we have some of that here in this graph. But also our aides, our Aide IIs, and with our co-teaching model and our MTSS supports are also able to provide supports at more of a tier 2 level. So that gen ed piece for students who might need support for social emotional learning, who are also having behavioral challenges, we still have supports in place to support teachers. It can be instructional aides, it can be our counselors. So we're still looking at other ways of meeting that need without it being really this tight top tier 3 kind of high need solution. We don't want to wait for students to be in that area of behavioral need. We really want to increase our supports at our tier 2, tier 1 and tier 2 level. And this will allow us to have more aides on each campus who are trained for behavioral intervention. So we're really looking at more people and looking at how we're supporting that role, that need, and what the role is to support it. Okay, so looking at the providing behavioral supports to students, our Aide I's do this all day long, our Aide IIs do this, and our BSIs also do this. So it is not just our BSIs who provide behavioral supports. We have a specialized program at one of our schools that serves students with significant behavioral needs, and that classroom is staffed with Aide I's and Aide IIs. So there are not BSIs working with the students in that classroom. They are instructional aides who work with the students.
How many Aide I, Aide IIs, and BSIs do we have?
We have, we are going, I think the other slide shows us a breakdown of that.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Yes.
Next slide.
So, that's okay, that's okay.
And then we'll say we have, altogether, we have a total of 75 instructional aides. I don't have the breakdown at my fingertips of how many are Aide I's, how many are Aide IIs, but it's a total of 75 instructional aides.
And how many of these aides are funded with special ed dollars a year generally?
All of them are funded with special ed.
Because you can't use special ed personnel in the general ed classroom.
Right. We can, if we're looking at interventions to support a student who's in the assessment process, or we're looking at referral, or we're in SST.
Or you have a crisis piece and you're using an Aide I or an Aide II.
That's fine, because crisis is,
In general ed.
yes, and they're
Okay.
very infrequent.
Okay.
And so they're very infrequent that they're
Good.
happening. Typically, our students with more significant behavioral needs are served in our specialized programs.
Right, because it sounded like from people who have talked to us and written to us, that these things happen all the time.
No. But we're prepared for
Okay.
that. We know
Okay.
that they do happen.
Okay.
And like I said, we really want to be looking at supporting our students for social emotional needs before we're getting to the level of behavioral crisis, right?
Do all of the Aide I and Aide II serve on a one-to-one basis with a student?
No, not all of them are one-to-one. They can serve in that capacity, and some do, but not all of them do. Some of them are more assigned to a program. So if they're working in one of our specialized programs within that classroom, they may work with 2 or 3 of the students in that classroom. Some of them work with our ed specialists who do some co-teaching, and they're going through the training of co-teaching. And so they're assigned to work with students based on the goals of that student's IEPs.
And with those that are not taking the one-to-one position, be able to serve on a more of a helicopter perspective on the behavior side for the general population? Is that what you're anticipating? In other words, if there's a behavioral issue on the general group, not on a IEP or other, is it your anticipation that those are the ones that will provide the support, the ones that are not? Because I can
Yes.
see on one-to-one.
Right, yes.
You're dealing with that one behavioral issue, but not on a macro level.
Yes, so if we have a crisis and we need a team to support that crisis, we're not gonna pull a one-to-one aid from a student who requires one-to-one support. We would make sure that our crisis intervention team is comprised of the aides that are not necessarily assigned to one child, because we don't want to create a vacancy there when that person is supporting a behavioral crisis.
And currently that role, is that being handled by a BSI?
Not in all, we have crisis intervention teams at every one of our school sites, and that can be an Aide I, an Aide II, depending on their training. So we have people designated at each school who can respond when there is a behavioral challenge.
So the X in the box on the BSI that says provide behavioral support to students, is that a redundancy?
No, they all provide behavioral supports. It's just,
And if we eliminate the BSI from that, what are we left with?
our instructional aides.
Who are there now,
And
so is there a hole, I guess, is that what I'm asking, that's what I'm asking. If we remove the BSIs with that behavioral component, they're now fulfilled.
right.
Who's absorbing that hole?
They'll still be around there as an A2.
Right, they'll still, we're not losing the people, so they'll still be there. They'll be able to support classroom or program a student.
You're not losing any students, any personnel during student day.
Right.
I guess to put it in a different way of phrasing it, is it broken now? And if it's not broken, why are we fixing it?
We don't have a need for 40 hours per week, so we do have staff who are working when they don't have students to support.
I guess that's what we're asking, is what
And
are
so,
they doing?
when we get through it, I think as we go through, it'll become more clear, because I do have some, examples of schedules, so you can see exactly what that looks like for a day, a kind of a snapshot of a staff member's day.
Is there a cost to this, between, eliminating the BSIs and moving down to an A2? Like, is there a cost savings, or is this entirely just a need-based issue?
The decision, the reason that we brought this requisition forward was not due to, it was not motivated in order to save money. It was motivated due to a lack of work for these individuals. With that said, GeeWah, because there is a reduction for these employees, they will be going from 40 hours a week and to 30 hours.
Could I ask how much that would cost? Like, what would be the difference?
I don't have the dollar amount for total, just because it'll depend on where each individual is on that salary schedule. I will tell you though that the hourly rate for each of these individuals is the same, whether they were a BSI or whether they were an E2. So hypothetically, if they were making, this is not a dollar amount, but if they were making $30 an hour, they would still receive the same hourly rate of pay, but it would be for 30 hours a week, for 30 hours of work a week versus 40 hours of work a week.
Benefit.
And then the second part of that is the cost for benefits. Currently, if an employee is a 40-hour a week employee, they are eligible for full-time benefits under our district's.
But 30 don't.
If you're 30, you don't. And so instead, what ends up happening is that the district contributes 70% of that cost for the employees, so the employees would have a cost of covering 30% to buy for their benefits.
So we're talking about lowering their salary and increasing their burden.
Correct.
Financially.
And I think it's important to point out that we have, how many did you say, 70 aides now currently doing the same work, who are not eligible for 40 hours a week. They're not eligible for full-time
And
benefits.
the BSIs are how many?
5. And we have a group of 70-ish who are not eligible to get those same benefits, but they're doing very similar work.
It sounds like you're saying this is not cost-driven, it's just you would rather have those people in different positions for the way that you have to run the program.
Yes, supporting students directly, yes.
How did they become BSIs in the first place? How did, what was, I mean, we got, it seems, did they work their way up to it and now we're pulling a rug out from underneath them? Is it seemingly a demotion? I'm just curious.
Is there a special certificate or
It
credentials that they
it
have?
is not a demotion. It is, like I said, they were A2s. They are doing very similar work in some situations to some of our Aide IIs. In some cases, much less hands-on than our Aide IIs are. And some of that will be evident when we show you the schedule. You'll see the difference between some of the work that the Aide IIs are doing versus the BSIs.
Yeah, I think we need to get to that, yeah.
So basically what to know there is we do have Aide Is, we have Aide IIs. They are all responsible for behavior. They're all responsible for documenting, observing and documenting, collecting and reporting data, all of them. And our Aide Is and Aide IIs are doing that work currently on a daily basis.
And they do that, the collecting and reporting data is done during the school day and aides
Yes, all aides collect data on goals
and
and,
report it.
yes,
During the school hours, not after hours.
right. And again, we are looking at, really, this will allow us to be much more flexible in our staffing. We can build time in to staff when we have the right staff doing the right work in the right places. We can build in time to meet with the BCBA. We can build in time to do data reporting into a Google document. We can do all of that when we have the right people doing the right work in the right place.
The only thing I'm concerned about is if in 2016, I guess is when this all began, did we as a district make some kind of commitment to some people that if you do this, we'll move you up to a BSI? If you meet these goals, if you get this certificate, if you somehow 5 people became a BSI, and I guess the question that I have is why are they BSIs and not Aide IIs beginning in 2016? And if we did make a commitment to them, well, I want to stand by whatever commitment that is. I'm not gonna, it doesn't sit right with me to turn our backs on that commitment.
I'm not aware of any commitment that was made.
Don't they have some sort of specialized training?
No, they have, they attended the same training that our other aides attended. 2 years ago, when we had our, the district closed for COVID, we made sure that all of our aides attended behavioral training. So they've all attended the same training, and since then, we have continued to offer ongoing training. And like I said, now we have district staff who is designated trainers to be able to conduct training directly. We've increased, since the BSIs were brought on, by an additional BCBA that we didn't have in 2016. There was 1. Now we have 2. For reference, San Marcos, who's K-12, also has 2 BCBAs.
I guess, why do we have
So-
BSIs in the
So
first place?
are they not certified or like more advanced somehow? Because exactly what those saying, like, why do we have them in the first
Again,
place?
that's why we don't need this position any longer. We're
So we
really,
created it at some point though, so
Right,
it wasn't
and-
needed at some point.
and our programs have changed to, in the last 6 years. So we've really moved more to a tiered system of support and looking at supporting children social emotionally, before we get to this level of kind of a top-down behavioral approach. We really want to have the flexibility to be able to support our students, tier 1 and tier 2, on an MTSS model. The BSI position also, the way that it was created was very much around ABA, which is a behavior modification program, which, philosophically, we have moved, again, we're moving along with our programming and really looking at trauma-informed care and looking at supporting students social emotionally. So we're not so much behavior modification after the fact, but how to support students. Why are we having behavioral needs, and what can we do to support that student before we get to that level of requiring behavior modification?
Jenny, perhaps you could also speak to how our specialized programs have changed to accommodate student needs and behaviors now versus 2016, where it was kind of just
SDC and everything was lumped together.
So we have worked really hard to redefine our programs to really be meeting specific needs of students. Prior to, in 2016, our special ed classrooms were all SDCs, special day classes. So there was no distinction between based on students' needs. Each site had an SDC classroom. So you might have a student with behavioral challenges who's working at grade level in the same special day class as a student who had intellectual disabilities.
That's not what my kid had. My daughter was in an SDC when it was first, and you recall, it was presented to me that she would be put into an SDC, and my first inclination was, wait, that's not where she's at. She's not at that level. But then I came to realize and find that the SDC level that she was placed in was more geared toward other kids that had the same issue that she had, or similar issues that she had. And it wasn't what my own thought about what an SDC was. So it became clear to me that SDCs vary based on the levels of the children that are in those SDCs. So what you're saying to me doesn't
Based on
line
the
up
level
with-
of the children that was at that school site, but it depends on what children were at each school site. Whereas what we have done now is really created programs based on learning needs, instructional needs. So we've gotten away from things like mild mod severe, which is old language that has been used in the past. We're really looking at what do students need. Are students working on functional life skills? Are they looking at, do their IEPs reflect a need for goals related to functional skills? We have a program at one site that meets the needs of students who have those goals. So it's really defined by student need based on their IEP goals. And we have a classroom specifically designated for students who have social emotional learning needs, who have more significant behavioral challenges. We did not have that program before. Those students were either required to attend a different school in a different district, or they were in our SDC classrooms. And so we saw more behavior from them when they were in a classroom that was not geared specifically to their needs. So that is what we have available now to our, through our SELF program. And like I said, we have instructional aides supporting those students all day long.
Because it was always my understanding that certain schools had different needs, kids that had special needs. For example, some of the more severely needy kids were at different schools, and maybe not their neighborhood schools, because those special day classes offer programs that fit them better. And I'm not seeing how that's different than what you're talking about.
We have defined those classes based on the curriculum and the goals of the students, whereas before it was sort of, the programs were not designed or defined, based on the curriculum. We have programs now that offer an alternate curriculum.
Could you tell us, so out of all the special classes, there's 10 special classes throughout our district, throughout our schools. Are there 10 different things going on? Is it 10 different categories?
Curricula.
Yes, so I can speak to those.
Like one is this, one
Yes.
is that, what?
Yes, so
What are they?
Okay, so there aren't 10 different classes, there are different sites, but what we have at, first of all, this reflects our students with individualized academic support. So basically our students with IEPs, subtracting the students who only receive speech therapy. We didn't include those here because typically they're not supported by an aide.
And not all the students with individualized academic supports are in those special classes, correct?
Correct,
Yeah.
right. We also have our students who are served in the learning lab
Yeah.
or through our co-teaching model.
Mhm.
So in fact, that's the majority of our students.
So the difference between the 188 students that you said in special ed and what I calculated is 284
Right.
here are just the speech.
Yes.
So there would be before pre-kindergarten and below?
No.
Or all through K through 6? too?
All students
Or
who
just
might
speech?
just have speech, yes.
Okay,
So
not
they're-
an IEP, but just have speech.
Right, they have an
Okay.
IEP, we wanted to reflect really who's supported by the aid, by our instructional aides. Typically, our students with speech-only IEPs don't have
Got it, okay.
support. So looking at that, our special classes that we have across the district, we have our CCI classroom, our core content instruction, our ALC classroom, which is our alternative learning curriculum. Those are our programs at Del Mar Heights, our 2 classes there. At Sage Canyon, we have our SELF program, that's our social emotional learning foundation program. Sycamore Ridge, we have an upper grade CCI classroom and our FLS, which is our functional life skills classroom. And then Torrey Hills is our special ed preschool program. So those are the 3 special ed programs that we have there.
So the special classes at Torrey Hills are 3 preschools?
Yes.
3 preschool classes?
Yes, and
Which are also have gen ed kids?
yes. And we have, and again, those are our special classes. Our other students are served in the learning lab or through the co-teaching model, which really has increased our inclusion, our time in general ed for all of our students.
Can you say one more time what CCI stands for?
It's core curriculum, so these are students who are not on an alternative curriculum. They're accessing the gen ed curriculum, but with modifications, yes.
And where are the BSIs?
So we have 5 BSIs. We have 1 BSI who is shared between 3 different sites. We have a BSI at Ashley Falls, at Del Mar Heights, and like I said, the others, one at Sycamore Ridge and the other is shared between the other sites.
So are they traveling throughout the day?
Typically not. Typically, we don't have a need at some school sites. So if you'll go to the next slide, I
Just
think.
curious, Abby, before you get to the schedules. So on the speech piece for this, have we had an increase in the numbers of students requiring speech intervention or speech services since we've had the COVID with the masks?
We haven't seen that, not that I'm aware of, but I haven't done a deep analysis of it either.
Okay.
In all fairness.
I'm just curious.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think what we definitely heard is it's harder to understand
Oh,
it for
it's
sure.
absolutely hard to
Yes.
understand,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, we did, we always ask for our staff's schedules. We asked, BSIs to share our schedule. So this is one of our BSI's actual schedule. So we chose one BSI to share. So where you can see, that we're talking about this time in the morning and this time in the afternoon, that we don't have students on site and we don't have work for our staff members. This particular schedule reflects 7 to 7:45 as a check-in with teachers. Our teachers report to, their day starts at 7:45. So there is not work for them to do during that time period.
The support with recess supervision, I
So-
thought you had on the previous,
Yeah, I know
that
so
you
too.
they didn't do that.
Right,
So
and
what are
so.
they doing?
That's really what I wanted to show this example, because I think it is a good example of why we are saying we do not need this position, the way that it is defined. Because support with student arrivals, we have students who need support with arrival have aides already assigned to do that. We don't have an hour a day, 5 days a week of a need for student observation. Students that need data collection have aides assigned to do that.
That's what we're saying when we're saying we don't have this need.
Who's doing the general observations for those that don't have a one-on-one student, if necessary?
Then there, an instructional aide would be doing that work.
But how, if they're not?
Or, right, whoever's addressing that goal for the student is always taking data. So our aides who are supporting students with academic needs, they're
Sure.
taking that data every day.
But the non-IEP student, from a general standpoint, those that don't have, there are behavioral needs to be addressed in the general population.
Right.
Who's doing that?
So this is 100% responding to data reporting for progress on goals for IEPs.
Okay.
You can't have somebody in special ed position doing general ed.
So that would be a counselor.
Yeah, that would be a counselor.
Yes, it could be, yes, it could be. Depending on the needs of the student and do we have this, is the student in a student study team process? Are we looking at that? It could be the BCBA, depending, are we assessing the student? So again, looking at what the needs are, we don't have a need for this position as it is defined. You brought up an excellent point, Scott, support with recess supervision. We have people assigned to do that. That should not be the role of a BSI.
Yeah, what is this person doing?
That's a good question.
Twiddling their thumbs?
So that's what we're showing is that we don't have a need for this. This is not the role of this person of this position to be doing these duties. Support with lunch supervision. So again, what we're looking at is that we do not have the work to support a 40-hour-a-week position.
I guess the question I'm having is this has been going on for 6 years of this?
I can't speak to that. I can tell you that we look at staffing annually, and as we know, the last 2 years have been different. So we're taking a good look at it now. Can we see the next slide? Oh,
Let me ask you one more question. We had a teacher talk about how a BSI individual is the best he's ever seen. On a schedule like this, where is the involvement in that one particular class? Because this seems more broad.
I don't know who that.
I don't recall which teacher it was, but they said that they've never had a specialist in the 20 years or whatever period they've been teaching that had a more significant effect on their students. I don't know if you remember the speaker.
I don't know. Again, I think what we really want to focus on is taking that skill set. We want to make sure that we have A2s who can do that work as well, so that we're able to have those skilled instructional aides working with our students. Next one. So this is an A2. This is an actual A2 from one of our programs. We asked for schedules. This is, so you can see the difference. No, they arrive at 7:45, immediately they're working with students, they're addressing student needs throughout the day. And then their day finishes at 2:30.
So where would in this schedule then, so debriefing with the teachers, that type of thing where they're interacting with the teachers?
So anytime that they're working on goals, that they're addressing specific needs, yes, that's all communicated back with the teacher. This is all under the supervision of the education specialist, the special ed teacher. This is all supporting the student directly and supporting the teacher. And again, as if we can increase our staff that is skilled and able to work with students directly as far as our aide positions, we can be more flexible in our staffing and how we're defining this work throughout the day. So we can build those times in, under the direction of the teacher based on the teacher's needs in the classroom. Okay. So again, our focus is always supporting the students and our teachers and staff. So really looking at, as we have been, continuing professional learning opportunities for our aides and our special ed staff. We will be conducting principal trainings too, specifically on behavior and behavioral supports. We have ongoing crisis intervention teams at each site. We have that now. We will continue to have that. Our CPI training, like as I mentioned, we have Aide I's and Aide II's trained in CPI, and we have our Director of Special Ed is a trainer for CPI and can train staff. And then we want to really look at increasing our multi-tiered systems of support to make sure that we're providing strong tier 1 and tier 2 interventions for social emotional well-being, which often is what results in behavioral challenges.
Short question. With all this professional learning, are you now then expecting the other people to do more than, they need to pick up more slack than if the BSIs are leaving?
They're not leaving?
Or not, if they are being reduced to an A2, or like, will then principals need to do more? Will aides need to do additional, or will it be essentially the same?
No, we're just looking at how we're meeting the needs of the students, it's not more, it's more effective.
I mean, there's no less support during the day than you currently have.
Sounds like there's more support during the day. I'm sure you're
There might be more
reallocating them to
support,
where
yeah.
they're
I mean, there's no, they're not decreasing any, it sounds like they're not decreasing any time with students during the day with this change.
And that's a perfect world. I mean, if the ultimate effect is these BSIs go elsewhere and we lose staff, then we have a problem, right? Or do we?
I mean, you hire staff to, maybe you're gonna have this number of FTEs, so yeah, if you lose staff, you have to hire a new person, but yes. I think there's some advantages to being in Del Mar, but it's everybody's choice. Realistically, lose.
So moving on to new legislation, we have talked about.
Very thorough. I just want to say one thing. I just so warm my heart that there's more inclusion in the classrooms over time. I mean, that is just how it should be, and the maximum support in the classroom. I'm not saying I'm an education specialist. My personal opinion as a parent, as a community member, I think it's great that you're trying to find ways to support kids to be with their peers more as much as they can.
And really looking at this as a preventive model, right? And not a heavy behavior modification, but really supporting the needs of students before we get to the point of the behavioral challenges.
Preventing rather than reacting.
Right,
So,
right.
If you're trying to build in some time with the aides to work with the, if you need to build that for schedules, or you should be looking possibly at even adding an additional aide then, so that you can make that, so it really wouldn't be a cost savings, you might add actually more
Right,
time.
well, that's what we're looking at,
So,
because
okay.
we're also adding a school.
Yeah,
So
that's true. You're gonna-
so,
well, same number of students, but you just.
right,
different,
right,
Yeah.
but we don't have aides typically split between sites, so we're
Right.
looking at personnel, and like I said, really making sure that we're being efficient with our staffing.
Yeah, because you're building a little bit more time, you're taking out, a little time with student, you might have to add an extra aide to pick up that, all those little hours that you're removing.
That's where we're looking at the opportunity to maybe provide provide more additional
Yes, this
tutors
might
to
actually
allow these.
cost more in the long run, but more effective use of the funds.
Yes.
But it's very easy to perceive this as a cost savings because we're no longer paying those 5 individuals that are 30% of their benefits. So it's very easy for somebody without,
Like that.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was my rationale, saying that's not a motivation, that's not what is driving us bringing this recommendation forward. It's about how do we maximize the amount of people who are there providing the direct supports to our students. That's where the most critical need is. We recognize the need to support our kids, to support our staff. And so how can we maximize the number of adults that we have to provide that support?
And no child will suffer as a result.
No.
And what about teachers? Will any teacher?
We will make sure we have support for our teachers, absolutely.
We recognize the hard job that our teachers have and the great job that they do. So our job as a district for staffing is to ensure that we're giving our teachers the tools that they need to support our kids.
Yeah, we don't want to make their hard job harder.
Right, so in transitioning to new legislation, we have talked about universal TK some over the last year. As a reminder, it would be a 14th grade level. It would result in 7% budget reduction for K-6. That doesn't include facilities, which we look at the cost right now. And so it would be the most expensive grade due to the staffing requirements. Right now, it's looking at 1 teacher and 1 aide with a ratio of 12 to 1 right now, proposed to reduce to 10 to 1 as time goes forward. Currently, it is not funded for community-funded districts, and it really isn't required for community-funded districts, as TK currently is not required for community-funded districts. That being said, we are, and community-funded districts are advocating for funding for TK students. We were in Sacramento just last week. If it is funded, and so we've actually learned more just in that trip as well. And so if it's funded, the projected LCFF revenue, the local control funding formula revenue, that would still result in a district-wide budget reduction due to a couple of factors. So what they're looking at is it would fund on the per student basis, which is there's a base grant of $8,500 per student. And then they're looking at an add-on, which is $2,800 to maintain a 12-to-1 ratio. Currently, if we were an LCFF district and K3, they have a class size reduction add-on, it's about $800. This is a larger one because they recognize that ratio. But even in that, you have a total proposal of $11,300, and our revenue and what we spend on each student is about $14,500. So you're looking at an over $3,000 per student difference. And the other thing that we learned when we were out there last week is that the advocacy that's going forth and the conversations in Sacramento are around only partially funding UTK. And they're looking at the fact that September 1 to December 2, some people are providing transitional kindergarten right now, so that's not on the table. But they're looking at funding is the December 3rd through August 31st, so really 3/4 of the students that would potentially attend UTK. So it's a new development. We had not heard that until just this round. It's definitely concerning, and we're having conversations with SF Squared around the advocacy. But when you look at that, if we look at funding, and so we tried to show this more graphically. If we said a 20 student class, that's a pretty typical class in kindergarten. If we had the funding and what we spend on a kindergarten class right now, we're at about $280,000 for a 20 student kindergarten class. With the funding that's proposed, again, current status isn't that it's funded, but if we ended up, the advocacy was successful, and we would still be underfunded in a manner where that one 20 student classroom of TK would be funded in a range of $180,000, $170,000. So we're looking at over $100,000 a classroom as well, that we are underfunded for what we are spending on a class of our students in the kindergarten, and we'd be looking at a staffing ratio that's a little bit higher.
Yeah, even if they were to fund TK, we're still having to take money out of our K-6 class and to be able to run it, because we're not.
But it's a pipe dream. The elephant is sitting in the middle of the room. Because even if we got fully funded by somebody and we we had somebody pay for all the teachers that are necessary to have a TK program. Where are we gonna have it? Can we do it? We don't have the facility. What happens then? And so I think our advocacy towards TK needs to be focused not only on the teachers, but we need the facilities funding as well. And I think if we project what we're saying here, we use a big hole, $70 million that we need to do in order to have a program like this that's licensable. How do we do that? And is that something you're considering when you do these advocacy ventures?
Yes, and right now, the energy and the movement, if there is movement, is around the base funding. Because without that, there isn't, the facilities really don't matter. So there's a lot of the energy in the community funded districts world. There is some support now from AXA. That sounds like there's some movement, some support from CASBO, but is around getting that base funding, because you don't have funding for the program at all. You don't have funding for facilities. I will tell you that currently the funding for facilities has not increased. So there isn't funding that we would be able to access right now.
But can we put a program, let's assume we get all the funding we need, right? Perfect. Can we put a program up?
It would come out of the bond money, and so it would affect our K through 6.
It can't, it's not listed in the bond. It wasn't
So
stated
have to
in the
come out of
bond.
general fund money.
So just to be clear though, what do we need as far as facilities? to put
I'll
on the
give you
program
some
if
more
we got things
details.
coming?
I'm getting ahead of you, Chris.
I can, you know what, I can, you know,
And that, you know, they have been pessimistic about the potential to get any funding for community funded districts. So our then concerted effort, and we were there, the four of us were there last week, has been to really increase. We've already done so much. We've met with our local legislators, we've sent letters, we've called them, we did that again last week, multiple times, to step it up and have, you know, our counterparts do it as well. And they Schools for Sound Finance was very pessimistic, and so too has Association of California School Administrators. That said, we don't give up. To get to your point, Doug, we've stepped it up to try the best we can to get some funding.
But the concern that I have is that we find ourselves, at the end of the day, people agree on the funding of teachers, and we end up with an unfunded mandate that requires us to spend $40 million, and then we have to get another bond. Is that what we're gonna end up having to do? Because there's a need to increase the facilities to accommodate a mandate that really we can't comply with. I mean, is that where we're headed? So what I'm saying is, it needs to be part of the discussion when we're having this discussion for TK, that we can't.
And we are doing that. It's just not being received as such, as being, I mean, truly their legislators, some of them are not even signing on.
To
To any kind of funding for community funded districts for TK. There is an expectation of some that a 14th grade
Tony Atkins is not signing on to it.
should be absorbed by a K-6 district, which, as we can see, is a huge concern for our K-6 program, if that happened.
What's the top, because I know up in Northern California, some of these districts that have, you know, not had TK for a very, very long time are going to have it. Even though they're still community funded, like Menlo Park and Mill Valley, I mean, those are districts that have for years and years and years not had TK. And so I'm wondering what you are hearing from your superintendent counterparts of those districts, why they've changed.
I haven't heard from those districts, and they were not present at the meeting we were just at. The ones that we were present with did not voice that when we were there at the last meeting. Great concern about, you know, how this could be done without any funding.
You know, on a facility standpoint, most of the districts around the country are losing students at a tremendous rate. And so there are spare classrooms.
And it's not the classrooms.
But, no, there's spare
It's the
classrooms.
bathrooms I'm concerned about.
But there's spare, if there's spare classrooms, there's spare kindergarten classrooms, we would have bathrooms for a TK program. They do have the facilities if you've been hemorrhaging students over the years. So they still have those specific classrooms they can use for TK. So, I mean, it's not every school district, but it's certainly the ones that, the larger ones.
To be honest, I don't care about the districts, I care about ours.
I know.
I can share a little bit as you talk about capacity. I'll just kind of jump ahead and then jump back, but this is slide 25, so if you want to see the packet. I did go through and, it's been brought up in a couple of meetings. I've gone through and looked across the district. We looked at our total classrooms, we looked at our portable classrooms, and then kindergarten classrooms with restrooms. And so, as I was looking at it, we've had some change over the last couple of years. So 2018-19 was the last year prior to starting any of our construction projects. And so that 2018-19 is sort of the pre-bond program normal. So we had 303 total classrooms, we had 38 portables, that still had 13 on Delmar Heights, we had 10 at Sage Canyon, so we had a number of portables across the district. There were 26 kinders with restrooms, and then I just sort of did a calculation of total without portables because the board has given direction in the past that as we move through the bond program, we should be removing the portables as we've opened the 9th school. So as we look at this year, we have a kind of a reduction because we have only 7 sites that are up and running. So we have 273 total classrooms. We have 30 portables. Some of those are actually the temporary ones that we have because of Delmar Heights being off campus. So we're kind of including just looking at all the classrooms. And we have 23 kinders with restrooms. And then if you look at looking forwards to the opening of Delmar Heights, which is why I chose 23-24, because we'd have the 2 schools, Pacific Sky and Delmar Heights, open. We'd be at a total of 319 classrooms. We'd still have 25 portables because we wouldn't have done the modernization yet with Delmar Hills and some of the other sites with portables. But that looks at, as we then project out of 23-24, as we replace and modernize and move those portables. If we do not replace them, we'd be at 294. So I just share because I think these are kind of the 2 key numbers, or the 294 and the 303. Where we started for the bond program, we go through the program, and as we build, and if we do not replace the portable classrooms, we'll end up at a little bit less in total number of capacity across the district. I will also say we don't have 300 teachers, but this includes our K-6 classrooms, our specialty classrooms, our STEAM Plus programs, our after-school programs. So it looks at each of our sites, we typically have 10 to 13 other classrooms that are used for those programs that we've valued and prioritized throughout the years.
Are you considering the classrooms at Ocean Air, the quasi-portable classrooms at Ocean Air as portables?
No.
Okay.
Because those have been installed, the stucco siding, those should last us more than 20 years, and we have to pull them off. So there are some at Torrey Hills in the northwest that have been well maintained and should last us, and there are some at Carmel Del Mar, the 6th grade wing, which is also well maintained and should last for a number of years. So those aren't listed in that portable number because those we would continue with the modernization efforts and continue to use.
And I guess the question that I have is, in light of the fact that those classrooms have restrooms, is that a potential answer to our issue, our facilities issue, if TK becomes an unfunded mandate requiring us to have facilities that we're not?
So there are a handful of classrooms like that around the district that aren't traditional kindergarten classrooms. Some typically there's a couple of those, and then a couple, 1 or 2 at some sites that have usually have a special ed program. They aren't enough to fulfill a whole other grade levels. There would be I don't have the count of classrooms that we've used because some of those special ed classrooms we need a restroom. So we'd have to do a little bit more analysis to look at how many could potentially be repurposed. But there's a handful.
And I'm just trying to avoid a brick and mortar construction if TK becomes.
Do we know how many classrooms?
Well, it's not mandated, it's just,
But it may.
No.
It may become
No,
mandated.
if it may, if it does.
So-
I'm saying may, if it may.
Would it be a consideration to offer it only at some schools?
It could be, yeah. And there are many districts who are looking at having, sort of regional, transitional kindergarten programs. Many that have done it even with the, larger districts with, the original TK.
I guess it depends on how, like, I mean, if it becomes mandated in how many students are actually gonna take part in it, you may be able to offer it at only certain schools, and maybe that helps with your facilities as you.
So that would be my follow-up question is, if we have to have TK, and how many students would we be servicing, and how many classrooms would we need?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, I think we have to,
How many kindergarten classrooms do we currently?
currently
how
have
many
23 kindergarten
sections do we have
classrooms,
now?
so I think you have to expect that there's the potential that over time, with our program, that it builds out to that 23. It very well may not start at the 23, it might start at a lower number, but I don't have a way to know exactly what that would be. I think we have to look at it along the lines of another grade level potentially coming.
All right, well, that's so right.
Just the one other, because cost was brought up, we did, this was asked of us, and the modular was asked as well. So we did look at, just looking at what costs are right now, and thinking about it on a kindergarten TK level where you're gonna have restrooms as well. We would expect new construction to come in at approximately $1,000 a square foot. California's Title V would ask for 1,350 square feet for kindergarten classrooms. And so at new construction, you look at about $1.35 million per classroom. Modular typically comes in at 80 to 85%. So at 80% of that, you'd be at $1.1 million.
But you can have TK in a modular.
You can have it in modular. So
Right,
it's
yeah.
portable as you can't have it. So modular construction that is built so that it is, foundation and built. Because modular really is permanent construction. It's just sort of prefab and then brought in. So it saves you some of the cost, but sometimes the view is that because it's prefab, it's really cheap, but it's cheaper, but at 80 to 85%, it's not I just wanted to kind of share where that savings would come in. So if we looked at that, there are some then costs that come along with, you still need an architect, and you still need BSI approval, and you still need to build a foundation, ADA, and all the other stuff that may come with it. But this is a general per classroom cost that we might save were we to need to build further classrooms. I'm gonna shift back to slide 19, because I don't want to skip over universal meals. We had a board meeting a week ago, made some conversation about costs, and we've actually, our team, Mark and Tiana and Michelle Buffy have been diligently work on this on a weekly basis, and we are looking like we'll be an amended meal program to begin next year, and we're getting to an idea of costs, and so it looks like for the first half of the year, as we will have that program, it will likely come at a contribution, meaning it will cost more than we receive of approximately $300,000. We are anticipating that once we get up and running with the kitchen and we have the food service management company, that it should be cost neutral. So that's the RFP process. That would start in the new year. So we're looking at next year to get up and running to be able to meet that gap at right now an estimated $300,000 cost to the program.
And you get this for breakfast and lunch?
Correct.
How is it able to be cost neutral?
Because that, in the RFP process, they are looking at doing it through the National School Lunch Program, and so they know what they'll be able to bring in, and then they will work with us on a menu, and then they'll work to make sure that food waste is minimized in those pieces to be able to run a program at break even. And we have talked to other districts and other folks that have used them. That is the expectation that we would be able to break even. So we also know that this is new to us. We'll be monitoring that, and then we'll be looking at over time, is food service management the right way to go? Is there another route the district should do? This is, I think, absolutely the right first step for us to study the program. It won't be choice lunch, but it will probably be a much smaller number of choices. So it'll be a more traditional program, but we'll have like a meal list that you'll get, so you get 2 to 4 weeks in advance, so people will know what's coming, so you can plan ahead, and so we can get some numbers. We can hopefully also reduce waste and have it be.
Can kids bring their own plates and utensils?
I think we're gonna have some stuff packaged because we delivered it individually, unfortunately. Yeah. So looking into facilities, now that we are moving forward and we have some momentum with Del Mar Heights, we are actually looking at Series A, anticipating all proceeds spent by July or August of this summer. And so we are in the process now of looking at Series B. We've had conversations with Adam Bauer and our consultant team, and we were actually looking at a higher Series B than we originally anticipated, and looking at 64 million. We'd originally looked at, if you may remember, because we were going to start at Del Mar Heights and have Pacific Sky, and with as much as we had at the beginning, needing to have a Series B only 2 years after our original Series A, by having it have to wait a little bit longer, we're able to actually bond at a little bit higher level. So we're looking at 64 million. It would finish up Pacific Sky and Del Mar Heights. It would allow us to do Del Mar Hills, continue with our classroom upgrade modernizations and playground upgrades, and begin moving forward with planning on Carmel Del Mar as well.
How are the interest rate increases impacting our Series B?
That's another reason to get in now. And so in talking with Adam, we met actually when I was at the Cash and had a conversation, and then Mark and I have had a conversation. We've had a group conversation probably as well, and we'll be moving forward. He feels that we're in a good spot to jump in now, and we're better off not waiting.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that you might want to do it earlier than later because of the Fed raising rates.
So we hope to have something brought to the board at the next board meeting that would allow us to move forward.
Is on the Series A bonds, when do we have to have that spent by?
We took this out in 2019, so it's sometime we need to have 85% spent by, I think it was October.
Mm-hmm.
So October of this year.
Is there some, I don't know, tolling of that as a result of litigation?
Well, it looks like we'll have it all spent, all of it spent, much less the 85% at this point.
We don't have a problem with that. I think so much money left over.
We have had conversations though as those concerns arose, and with Rob Ansel, our bog counsel, kind of looking at what does this mean for us, and he felt confident that if that were the reason, then there would be some backing with the IRS, and there'd be understanding of why you hadn't been able to spend your 85%.
So there might be, if it becomes an issue.
If it were an issue, but again, the fact that we're getting that close, and we're spending, we're done with the CFD, so we're spending bond funds now on Pacific Sky, so we're spending a lot of money each month on those big projects. And then deferred maintenance is an item that's come up a couple of times. So when we look at, and it's been brought up that we're able to address some of these needs through the modernizations and the bond program. And so we do have in our plan $47 million and $20 in deferred maintenance work. It's during measurement. This is stuff that's built into the measurement program. We've completed $2.6 million of that. That includes things like playgrounds, fields, asphalt, window coverings, flooring, items like that. In looking at that and building it out, that leaves it means that we would have approximately $50 million in deferred maintenance after the bond in that 25-year span, because most of the items that we will be involved in that will have some sort of a life cycle replacement in that 25 years after the bond. So when we look at that, we'll look at the funding sources we have to take care of that deferred maintenance. First, there's the set aside of 0.5% of our property tax towards deferred maintenance. So each year we commit funds to Fund 14 to save towards that. We have the general fund where 3% of our expenditures go toward restricted maintenance. And this pays for some of the maintenance staff, but it also pays for a fair amount of maintenance work every year. We have asphalt replacement, slurry seals, and painting and HVAC that we've done over the years. And then we put together a visual that kind of helps to show with what we're saving and what that deferred maintenance need. So is that deferred maintenance need, and this is a very linear graph. I mean, it may have a little bit more bounce to it, again, we looked at 2020 dollars, so things may escalate, but then we also will see some of those deferred maintenance funds escalate as well because our revenues will come in. So 3% is going to be more in 2040 than it is this year. So this is a rough draft of it, looking at our deferred maintenance funds in blue, our deferred maintenance need in orange, and it is not totally keeping up. It will take care of some portions of our deferred maintenance, but the current funding that we put forward would not take care of the full need over the course of that 25 year.
It is so odd looking at 2050.
So 2033 or so, we run out of money to pay for.
Well, I don't think we say we fully run out. I think when you look at that, we do have funds coming in, so it just means we may not be able to meet the needs of all the projects. So there are some things that you say, your HVAC, we're expecting to replace it 15 to 20 years. There are a lot of districts that will keep maintaining, keep an eye on, and say, this is looking good, and we're going to make it go 25. That's not a terrible thing. If it's looking good and you're keeping an eye on it and you're maintaining it. But there's also a point at which you need to keep an eye on that, and are we, by being reactive, are we now starting to have things fail and have to react? So I think that's the piece that we'll have to keep in mind, is how are we monitoring. So I just, there's been question about it. Again, it's a little bit rough. It is very hard to project out 30 years and see exactly what that number is going to be, but looking at the funding that we have and looking at the need based on this deferred maintenance round, this is generally what it would look like in the longer term.
Yeah, you just want to keep your eye on the ball as to what you know what the expected lifespan is for these items. And you might be able to get a few more years out of it and extend it, but at least you know where your shortfalls are probably going to happen. So you can kind of plan for that years in advance rather than say, we have a $10 million deficit, what are we going to do next year? So.
And many of the bigger ones will, the big things like roofs and HVACs do push out a little bit, so it gives us a little bit of time, but it is something that will not have full funding as you look at that. Skip a couple of slides, because we talked about classroom. And then the other item that we had, just looking at space, is professional learning. So as you well know, professional learning is an essential part of our culture, our teacher quality. We've been looking at the need for large professional learning. We have the need for large professional learning days of approximately 50 participants, and we've started to have some issues with parking, and also with the ability to run those PD days, those professional learning days, with the maximum efficiency. So, Shelley, you want to maybe talk a little bit about as we've had to move some of these to other sites, the benefit of the access to classrooms and some of the downside of not having an adult learning space, because we're now having to go to different MURs, and some of the impacts going to be that.
So the value of being on a school site is tremendous, because much of the work we do, we actually go in and work with students in classrooms, teachers. When we, for example, with Ron Richhart, we do teacher learning labs and co-construct a lesson and then go into that teacher's classroom and watch it play out with others observing. So it's incredibly valuable to be on a school site. Because we don't have a designated professional learning space other than room 305 at Ocean Air, which holds a small space, a small number of participants. We're constantly, we're a tremendous impact. Our team is an impact on other school sites. So we call around, they can't schedule. When we've scheduled at the beginning of the year professional learning in their MUR, they don't have spaces available that are large enough to even accommodate 30 individuals. Because of the day-to-day operation of a regular school site and all that happens during the course of that day. We spend a great deal of time packing up, moving the stuff we need, unpacking, packing it back up at the end of the day, bringing it back to the district office. In addition to just some of the challenges we have with what's available when we go to different school sites or different spaces, it lacks consistency. We don't know what kind of technology setup we'll have. Sometimes it doesn't work. Good example of, you know, just we don't have the right dongle, we don't have the right hookup, it's not projecting. And then, do we have whiteboards available? And just how to manage all of that adds an additional layer of complexity when we're planning our professional learning. So that is, be great to have a space with adequate parking.
How about the space, just provide adequate space for that
What's
kind
the
of?
capacity for this room?
This
Trying to
room,
look,
we,
I'm trying to find it.
when we've done our district-wide strategic planning and those large meetings, we've had up to 60 participants in this room. The problem we've run into is parking. And so because our professional learning is conducted during the school day, we no longer have parking available to us. And so we try to be, and some of our neighbors have been very accommodating, but as they've built out their space, their extra spaces are now occupied. So we aren't able to accommodate more than 20, even that's pushing it. We hold meetings about 15 people or less here now if we have to do it during.
But even if you have parking, I guess what you would like to have is the access to the classrooms, which you wouldn't have at this particular site.
That's correct.
So, I think you still might be able to get parking over here when they're done, but you mentioned the classroom and student availability.
That's really key, and parking does help, but even so, we're still limited. Even if it's an event where we don't need access, like a committee that involves parents, anything that starts 3 o'clock, which our advisory committees, et cetera, start at that time, we can't have it here because it's still during the regular workday, so there's not enough parking to accommodate.
So what are you guys wanting?
So we're looking at asking an architect to give us some help in reviewing the Torrey Hills, what was the ASP offices at near the kindergarten area. I'm looking at whether there's whether to modernize or adjust and turn that into a professional learning space. That would put us on a school site. There's parking. There's actually wonderful access as well because we have the gate that we've used for that program in the past that would allow for access that minimizes impact on that school site. And we do have the ability to use some of our Fund 40 funding so that it doesn't take away from the bond program and the projects that we're doing with that as well.
Is that going to be part of, or is that anticipated to be part of a discussion for the modernization of it?
It would be separate, so it would be its own project. It would, you know, if we were to move forward, we've been trying to work through this all this year. If we move forward with something like bring on an architect and doing some analysis, we need to bring something to you at the next board meeting. We need to start to be able to get it done the following summer because of DSA approval on other items. Torrey Hills is a couple of modernizations down the line, so I think that with the need, if we're going to move forward with something like this, we should move forward now, do the analysis and look at how we would make that modernization of that space or redesign of that space happen and be able to do it in summer of 23 so that it has the impact.
I know you haven't talked about it yet, obviously, but can you give me a ballpark, like what that might be looking at?
Yeah, we'd probably be looking at a $2 to $2.5 million cost for the overall project.
For architect plus building.
That or should she take last round?
Well, yeah.
How many days of large professional learning do we have for the school year?
A lot. I can tell you that we often are struggling to find days to fit it all in. So, because much of it is coordinated through instructional services,